I still feel this to some extent is you don't actually earn your title until you've been validated in an environment like that. You have to validate that you're not going to be a coward. Again, I don't think I would have been, but like you can't go out there and be like, oh, I would have crushed it in combat. Like that's a reckless thing to say because you have no idea how you'd respond.
You joined the infantry or you joined combat arms because you wanted to have that experience, because you felt like that was something that would be beneficial for you. And then when it doesn't happen, a lot of guys got out. Did you ever get an opportunity to deploy with the teams?
Yeah. No, I did a couple of deployments.
Okay.
But I wouldn't say problem because in a way it wasn't a problem. But like, I caught a window where it was all like contingency response. There wasn't actually active conflict. So like you would deploy. We have like a 2-year rotation, and then the last 6 months of that rotation you would deploy. And it was basically just sit around and wait. You know what I mean? And there was always something. Oh, this might go down, or this. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But it wasn't like, oh, we're going to Iraq or we're going to Afghanistan. We're gonna get it on.
Yeah.
Which was really frustrating, and I say that with a little bit of hesitancy because like obviously there's a bad side of that too. If you end up getting into a really bad situation and like you can lose friends and limbs and all the things, and that could change your life forever. So I don't want to like, oh, like we just wanted it. But as you probably can relate, like you do want to get it on. That's why you're there.
Yeah.
So
I can relate to that very personally, actually, because most of my peer group, when we joined in 2014, like I enlisted in 2014, and when we went to the infantry, me and a lot of the guys from the School of Infantry, we went to 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, and we were all in the weapons company. Most of us together. Some of us were in Golf and Fox, but we got to 2-3. The last time they deployed to combat was 2010 for the Battle of Marja in southern Afghanistan, and after that they stopped deploying to combat. They only went to They did like the unit deployment program to Okinawa, Korea, the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Australia, things like that. And so like a lot of us felt the same exact way you're describing. It's like you joined the infantry or you joined combat arms because you wanted to have that experience, because you felt like that was something that would be beneficial for you as a man or whoever, just in your like develop your life development. And that's why we joined the infantry, was to experience that, you know, to get it on, like you're saying. And then when it doesn't happen, a lot of guys got out feeling like their career was pointless, or they never got to do their actual job, or, you know, a lot of guys felt like I didn't do anything because I never went to combat and never experienced combat. But that happens because sometimes, like you experience, you don't get to choose where you go. You go where they tell you. Yeah. And it can be frustrating, especially when you're working your ass off for 2 years or a year workup, because our workups were a year long. We'd work our asses off and destroy our bodies for a year to go sit in Japan. Like, that was a very frustrating thing that a lot of Marines felt. And I'm sure that SEALs and every other branch have like experienced similar things, depending on like where you ended up deploying, or what deployments your unit was slated for that you did not get to have any input on at all, because that's just where they're being told to go. And that's why I can personally relate to what you're saying. Like, you don't want it. It's like, okay, there's a lot of bad stuff that comes, like, okay, none of my friends died. I didn't get shot. Nobody got hurt, you know, other than like minor mishaps and stuff like that. Like, a buddy of mine was in an AAV that landed in the water, and the AAV caught on fire when they were doing a landing in I think Malaysia, which was insane. Like, a bunch of guys inside, could have been super bad. But that's like not, it's different than like you're in combat and like you saw your friends blow up or something. Like, that's totally different. And like, I'm grateful that I've never had all like some of these horrible, horrific experiences, because I know a lot of folks that have, and I'm sure you do too. And that lives with you for the rest of your life, you know. But at the same time, you do, like, you know, you join the infantry for a reason. You join combat arms for a reason, and not getting to experience it is a hard thing to kind of like come to terms with, I guess, after it's all said and done, you know. So
yeah, and I think part of it for me, if I'm just being like a little vulnerable here, is like I feel like I feel like, and I still feel this to some extent, is you don't actually earn your title until you've been validated in an environment like that. Yeah, it's like we do all this training, and you know, they slim you down for, you know, a couple hundred dudes down to like freaking 20 guys and this and that. And then you go into a platoon, you got to go through it all over again and re-earn your trident and all these things. But it's like, okay, there's still one more rung on the ladder. Yeah. Because this is, you know, you have to validate that you're not going to be a coward. Right. Yeah. And again, I don't think I would have been, but like you can't go out there and be like, oh, I would have crushed it in combat. Like, that's a reckless thing to say, because you have no idea how you'd respond. Yeah. And it kind of equated to like, you know, like if we use like the NFL as an analogy, like let's say Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, like gets to determine when NFL seasons are played, right? But all the teams, what is it, 32 teams have to field a team, and you guys have to practice because like you don't know when Roger's gonna be like, all right, week 1 is next week, right? So all you're doing is just practicing, you know what I mean? And you made the team, you made the 50 whatever 3-man roster, and you got drafted out of college, and like you're this, you know, like. Okay, so you think you're legit, but until you actually play on Sundays, like you're just playing on the practice squad right now. No, but you're on the team. You know what I mean? Like you're one of, and I feel like that's kind of how I felt a little bit. Of like, all right, until we actually play a game. But it's like, unfortunately, you know, in this case, it's not the commissioner, it's the commander in chief of saying when we can actually go play the game. You know what I mean? So I feel like you know to be like, you know,
it's a good analogy.
Yeah, and that's because that's in a way how it is, because all you train so much, and that's where I think guys have a little bit of trouble, is because you almost feel like it's kind of a waste. You know, you don't really feel like you're doing your job, and then so many guys, like you're away from your family so much that eventually you're like, all right, like we just did like a 18-month workup. We train in all these environments, you know what I mean? And we train our butts off, our bodies are beat up. And then, you go and sit in Europe for 6 months, you know what I mean? And you're like, this is not, particularly at a time, you know, when, you know, there's other units that we're actually still, you know, getting in, you know, ticks and stuff. And we're like, all right, why is that not us? Like, why are they wasting us to go to a J set to train the Serbian special forces? You know what I mean? Like when we're, you know what I mean? And then we're just drinking beers in Germany. You know what I mean? Like, like it was fun, but it wasn't what you signed up for. Like, hey, I can do my European vacation. Like when I'm
my European vacation.
Well, we called it Operation Enduring Per Diem. Like, you know what I mean? Because it was, man. Per diem. I mean, but again, but then to your point, like, it's not your, like you're doing what you're told. So in a way you are doing your job, and you know so they would, and this is with the SF guys too. They use this a lot just for the J sets. I think that stands for joint combined exercise training, where you just integrate with another country's soft unit. And it's technically like we're training together, but it's really like we're training them. So that would be most of the deployment. You're just popping all over Europe doing J sets, which again was cool. You got to live in a new city, and like, you know what I mean? You're getting per diem, and like you're meeting some cool guys from other countries, and
good experiences probably.
It was, and interesting to see like how their tactics were different, which sometimes like, oh my God, it'd blow you away. Some of the, like,
oh, I'm sure.
Oh my God,
I'm sure.
You're just like,
why is everyone flagging everybody? What's going on?
I remember, I'm not going to name the countries.
Let's not doubt.
But there was a country that had just recently become like NATO certified, which I didn't even know was like a thing. But like their SOF unit had been like certified by NATO as like a recognized SOF force.
Oh wow!
So we went down there and we were going to train with them for a month, and so it was mainly going to be CQC, you know, close quarter combat, so room entries and in clearance and things like that. And it was like the first couple days. And so we were showing them how we would take down like a room with like a 4-man entry, right? Okay. Real basic. We had set up a couple of barriers on the inside, but it was like, all right, day one shit, right? So they were like, all right, I think it was my platoon chief or our LPO was like, all right, let's see how you guys would do it. And right, so they like stack up on the door. One, they're just an absolute ball of shit on the doorway, but they make entry, and the first guy walks in, and he's facing one way, and the second guy walks in facing the other way, and they like centipede into the center of the room, and then the 3 and 4 man just join this like little centipede, and they're all just pointing in different directions, but they like didn't take a corner or anything, and we're all looking at each other like, this has to be a joke, like they're pranking us, like there's no fucking
they gotta be messing with
us. And then like their senior guy, so like I think it was my LPO, was just like, hey, explain that to me tactically, like how make it make sense. Maybe I'm missing something. And then they were arguing that their way was better. So we're like, all right. So we put a guy with a paint gun like in the corner, and we're like, all right, rerun it. You know what I mean? Like one guy is gonna, you know what I mean? And it was just interesting to see like, oh wow, like we are way ahead. You know what I mean? We are way ahead. So then we had, try to explain to them, hey, here's, take a wall and do this, do that.
Yeah.
Like you're coming right into the, the fatal funnel, and you're standing there. Like you're, so anyway, it was an interesting, experience, and we got to train a lot with the Israelis, which was cool.
Okay.
they have like basically a mock Gaza town that they train in, which
No
is really
kidding.
neat. So we did some exercises there.
Wow.
And it's like all the alleyways are real tight and like, so
Super
again,
sketchy looking,
you
probably.
get to do cool stuff like that.
Yeah.
And those are, good guys, super young. Those like their version of their SEALs, they're all like in their like, like early 20s.
Oh, wow.
And very few of them have a career beyond 5 years. Like they just do their service and they bounce.
Yeah.
So their senior man was like 23. And then like our platoon chief's like 40 with 6'7" with sleeve tats and has like 15 years in the Navy. You know what I mean?
It's kind of like the Roman Legion compared to everybody else almost. You know what I mean? Because like the Romans were like a war fighting society for a long time before they started to crumble and stuff. But like you'd have guys that served for 20, 30 years. They fought in tons of wars, or maybe one war that lasted 20 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's interesting to see that the age difference thing. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think that service in Israel is like 2 years mandatory service, and I think 18 months for women. But if you want to be like a special operations MOS, like it's like a 5-year contract, I think. So those guys they'd come in at 18, and by 23, then they go to college. I think a lot of them do.
So they're special forces dudes that are serving for 5 years, serve for like 4 to 5 years or whatever, is like about the same time that your average like Marine would serve.
Yeah.
Like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. But like that 23-year-old is like in a way their senior man of like a platoon. Like imagine that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's kind of wild. I mean, we had some pretty senior guys that were pretty younger, but I mean, even for us, like my platoon sergeant at the time when I first joined in 2014, like he was a sergeant in the Second Battle of Fallujah.
Okay.
So he was like definitely in his late 30s, approaching 40 probably whenever I first got, and as a private, so that's like a significant difference. Although my like section leaders were sergeants and they were like probably close to my age, but I also enlisted like at the max age you could be. They were like 27, 28. But that's definitely still a lot different than like having a 23-year-old dude as your like the senior man in the platoon or whatever. That's very different. Yeah.
You know what's the other weird thing about that is hard for us to comprehend as Americans, because obviously we go on a deployment and it's like you're there 6-9 months or whatever, a year, and you come back.
Yeah.
Well, they're operating out of where they live. So like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
so imagine
weird.
like going on an op and coming back and like, like going home to your house that night and like sleeping in your own bed.
Yeah.
Because, like it's the areas they operate aren't that far away.
Yeah.
So
that's gotta be weird.
So you show up to base potentially and like load up, and then you'd roll and then you go do the thing and come back to base, put away weps and comms and all right, debrief, and then you roll out and you're, and maybe you're in bed by 4 a.m. or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was just like a normal work day.
I've heard that some of them bring their weapons home with them.
Well, in Israel, a lot of people are walking around with M4s.
No kidding.
Like if you're going through the market, all the military people are in uniform, and a lot of them have their issued weapon, which I thought was sick. I was like, that's actually kind of sick.
That's actually kind of sick.
Because you're in this like market and people are buying fruit or whatever and fish, and like you're like, okay, if someone were to get squirrely here, like I can look around and see 5 people within 100 yards that have their issued weapon.
Yeah.
Which I think obviously is a bit of a deterrent. So that
it is a deterrent.
Or they're all waiting at the bus stop to go to base.
Yeah.
And there's 10 people there in garrison camis with M4s just standing at the bus stop on the side of the road.
Yeah.
I was like, that's kind of badass.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've seen some pictures of like women Israelis like in the mall with their like in civilian attire with their their issued rifle slung behind their back.
It was a little weird at first. Yeah,
You're like,
for the ones that aren't in uniform, I'm like, do I need to like worry about this guy? But then you're just like,
you supposed to have that on
he's
you?
buying like a mango. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All right, I think he's good.
Okay, I guess this is normal.
He's buying fresh mangoes. I think we're safe.
It's a very different culture for sure, but they also have a lot of different like like you said, like they've got a lot of things right on their doorstep. Rather than. It'd be like if we were doing ops if you were living in like El Paso, Texas, and you were doing ops in Mexico, and then just coming right back to El Paso
going to bed that night.
Going to bed.
Yeah,
that'd be weird. It'd be kind of weird.
But it's interesting. You talk to other units. They think it's wild that we have this, like the fact that we deploy and we're away from our family for 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
From their perspective is wild. They're like, wait, when's the last time you've been home? And we'd be like, oh, this is like month 5 of a 6-month deployment. And they're like, wait, what? Like you haven't been home?
Wow.
So it's interesting to see how their perspective is so different. Yeah. And that's true with a lot of, I think, European units. Like they don't have like, oh, we're going to go out to the Mediterranean and just like sit on a ship for 9 months.
For 9 months,
that's not a thing. You know what I mean? Or go to Japan, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like that, the whole deploy, that readiness and that postured, strategy that we have like is not like in the norm in other countries. So it's interesting just to see a different perspective on it.
Yeah, for sure. I know that one of the things I think about sometimes is like when you talk about deployments and deployment times, like I like just another, again, going back to the Roman Legion, like sometimes those guys would go off for like 5 years.
It's crazy.
5, 10 years. I don't even know how long, like years and years that they're just gone from their families. And there's no, I don't know if they were able to send letters back then. I think they were just like, I'll wait and hopefully that he comes back. He's off fighting whatever war, and like they would just be gone for years at a time and then come back and like either their wife or their spouse is still there or they've moved on and their house has been sold or their house is gone. Like you never know what you're coming back to. I can't imagine like going to fight a war and not having talked to anybody back home for 5 years.
Yeah.
Like that'd
Crazy,
be a really weird, like a weird thing to wrap my head around anyway. Like just kind of crazy.
Well, I think the closest thing we have is World War II. You
Yeah,
know what
probably,
I mean?
yeah.
Like that was okay. Like this is not a deployment cycle. Like it ends when it ends. And
Yeah, you're over there
and
till
no
it's
one
over.
knew when it. You know what I mean? How wild is that? And then a lot of times
Yeah.
they had to lock down comms just because, like for OPSEC. You know what I mean? So like those
Yeah.
letters you're writing are getting held up for months. You know what I mean? So that it wasn't crazy because that wasn't that long ago. You know what I mean?
About 70, 80 years ago. So it's weird to think that wasn't really in the grand scheme of like time and
Yes.
like the timeline. It's not that long ago, but for folks like or folks like me anyway, like you look back and like all those guys, anybody that fought in World War II at this point, if they're still alive, they're probably over 100 years old, which is just insane. And I wish that we had podcasts and like interview stuff like this set up back in the early 90s or something, man. I wish there's so many World War II vets that I talked to throughout my like youth that I wish I could interview now, but they're just not around anymore.
Yeah, I got to go to the 80th D-Day.
Oh, you were there?
Normandy last June.
Okay.
Man, that was incredible.
I bet.